Yeah, this one's for the workers who toil night and day, by hand and by brain, to earn your pay, who for centuries on past for no more than your bread, have bled for your countries and counted your dead.
You're listening to WLPN 105.5 FM Chicago. You're listening to Labor Express Radio, Chicago's only English language labor news and current affairs radio program. News for working people by working people. I'm your host, Jeremy Lucero, and this is the Sunday, February 3rd, 2019 edition of Labor Express. On tonight's episode of Labor Express, LA teachers win an historic victory after 6 days on strike. As we reported on our last episode, and as you no doubt heard elsewhere given it was national headline news, on January 14th, UTLA, the United Teachers of Los Angeles, launched the first strike by LA teachers in 30 years. It was a bold move forced upon the union by 21 months of fruitless negotiations with LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District. Once again, public school teachers proved to the nation that strikes can win and that the working class in this country stands solidly behind teachers and a quality public education system. As we discussed in our previous episode covering the strike, at issue in this strike are some of the biggest challenges facing public education nationwide. Enormous unworkable class sizes, overcrowded classrooms, underfunded schools, cuts to school resources and support personnel, school privatization, and the proliferation of charter schools. These were the key issues in this fight. And on all of these issues, the striking teachers made gains in their new contract. We'll hear in tonight's program about what was won. We will also hear from one teacher and a couple of students about their frustrations with what they feel was not achieved by the contract. Though the LA strike has almost universally been hailed as a victory for both LA schools and LA teachers, as well as for the national fight for quality public education, there were teachers in LA who felt more could have been achieved. Beyond the contract gains of the strike, of particular interest to our Chicago audience is the fact that LA is ahead of Chicago in at least one important educational reform we've been fighting hard for here, an elected school board. The LA example highlights that as important as this reform is, it is no panacea. The current LA school board is dominated by individuals who are supporters of school privatization and who won their seats on the board with $9.8 million of campaign financing by pro-school privatization organizations and corporations. I talked with several teachers during the strike about this situation. Since we have so much to cover tonight in regards to the LA teacher strike victory, we once again this week are going to skip our usual Solidarity News International Labor News segment from our friends at Radio Labor and dive right into the main part of the program. A highlight of the 6-day LA teacher strike was the massive rallies held in downtown LA almost every day of the strike. The largest was estimated at over 60,000 people. The Sea of Red teachers was a constant presence, rain or shine, and unfortunately for the first week, it was uncharacteristically mostly rain for the Sunshine City. But the weather was clear and pleasant on the strike's 6th day at what would become the final rally turned into a victory celebration. Tens of thousands of teachers, parents, students, and community members gathered in Grand Park outside LA City Hall to hear the union leadership announce they had reached a tentative agreement with LAUSD. During the rally, I had a conversation with Charles Stam, a 5th grade teacher in Los Angeles. Charles provided an excellent overview of what the strike was all about, and though he at that point had not had a chance to review the tentative agreement, you could hear the sense of accomplishment in his words.
Charles Stam. I'm a 5th grade teacher at Wilshire Park Elementary, Koreatown section of LA.
Now you're out here at the rally at Grand Park. This is the 6th day, I guess they're calling this a strike, is that right?
Right, 6th day.
Another massive rally here. I mean, there have been several. I guess the rally on Friday, I wasn't able to be here for that, but I heard it was like 60,000 people or so.
They've had no problem getting big crowds. 98% of the teachers voted that they would strike months ago. So as far as the support, this is the highest support UTLA has ever had by far. So I'm not surprised. Okay.
And all the indication is, too, that the public is really behind you. I know there were polls done that said about 80% of people surveyed said that they stood behind the teachers. And when you have a rally on Friday that's 60,000, given that there's only 33,000 members in UTLA, you're talking about half that crowd as people are supporting you guys.
Right. And we had at our school, parents and students showed up, but the longer the strike went on, the more they showed up. So it just seemed that the support was increasing all the time. So we were pretty happy with the way things turned out, and we're not surprised to see for the rest of the district that is also the case.
I was just talking to a couple of SEIU members who are out on a sympathy strike with you guys today, a solidarity strike, but they were in the schools last week, and I asked them how things were going in the schools, and it was a school about a little over 400 students. They said they had one sub and then a bunch of administrators trying to run things at the school. But they said they were only getting about 40 students or so showing up out of 400. So that also shows, I think, that the parents basically were willing to, say, hey, we're not gonna bring our kids into school until the teachers have this, have a contract.
Right, and this is, despite many cases, the district warning them that if they were absent, that there'd be repercussions and things like that. About 3 days in, they were forced to send out a thing saying there wouldn't be repercussions. And so the longer the strike went on, the less and less students showed up at school because they knew nothing was happening there. No real education was going on. So that was their way of showing support. We are eternally grateful to them.
And my understanding, too, is that the union was very deliberate in the months leading up to the strike to really work with parents and community groups to build that support. So it was something that they realized was key to the success of the strike.
Absolutely. I think the whole idea that this was strictly for our salary, I think teachers, parents, we've been sick and tired of the way they've been staffing and funding the schools. And so finally, when they made their demands, they stepped up for everybody, not just us. And even though Buechner wanted to portray it as we offered 6%, they want 6.5%, and that's it. And their bootlick, the LA Times, did nothing but parrot that view. We just kept them on message that, we wanted these schools to be properly funded and staffed.
So, like I said, we're on the 6th day of the strike, but it's looking like this rally is turning maybe into a victory rally. I know that the news is just coming out. I know there's not a lot of information out there yet, but what do you know, or what have you heard, or what's your thoughts about the fact that there might be a tentative agreement?
Right. Well, I'm pretty happy about that there's going to be one. I love being in the classroom. I do not like being on the picket line. So as far as I haven't heard much, I know when we listened to the press conference, it sounded optimistic. But there's no victory until this thing is voted on, and there has to be, when in any sort of strike, there's going to be give and take. But I think we did pretty well. I think they were stunned at seeing everybody showing up and it just growing and growing and growing. I think that was a big impetus for getting them to actually seriously bargain, which they had not done for months, and getting also the political people, the mayor, to come in and offer to mediate. So we're very happy with the way that turned out.
What's your thoughts on that issue of the mayor? My understanding is the union has had a pretty good relationship with the mayor, and that they were really glad to see him step in and be a moderator in this discussion. Do you think he played a positive role?
I'll let you know after we vote, but I would say it's looking good. I would say yes, definitely. I think once he said he was going to step in, now we have essentially a neutral mediator. And so that put the pressure on both to really kind of come together and come to some sort of agreement. It wasn't easy because, they were going at it for 3 days of solid negotiations, or from Friday, really. So, yes, definitely I think Garcetti had an effect by simply stating that he'd come in to mediate.
I know throughout the strike, people in Chicago are watching very closely because, of course, we've had our own battles in Chicago with the teachers union and so on. And I think one of the things they were amazed to see was, again, we'll see what the actual results of the agreement are, but compared to Rahm Emanuel, our mayor in Chicago, who is very basically an enemy of the union, pretty clearly, it was interesting for them to see the language, at least, that Garcetti was issuing publicly in comparison to what we experienced in Chicago.
Right. And I think Rahm Emanuel, he's kind of the poster boy, and it happens here in California as well. What happens to the Democratic Party when the donor class becomes more important than the working class? So basically, he shut down schools in poor neighborhoods, of course, forcing them, neighborhood schools, forcing them to go out of their neighborhoods. It was, we were aware of what was going on in Chicago, and we were not happy about it. We were very supportive of their strike a few years back, and very happy with, to some extent, as to how it turned out. But yeah, I think that we're aware of the difficulties, and we're fully support Chicago and whatever they do. And yes, we would like to see the Democratic Party get back to who matters, which is basically for them, it's all of us, not just the donors.
I think that's very well said. It's interesting. You mentioned Chicago, and you're talking about the 2012 strike. I have heard from quite a few teachers here in LA that was a real inspiration for what you guys are doing here, that you guys watched closely what happened there, both the reform movement within the union in Chicago and then the strike.
Right. It started with them, actually, and then there was a lull for a couple of years, and then suddenly red state groups started to come out because, of course, the funding was horrendous there. So, yeah, Chicago was an important player, and for me, pretty much they're the ones who kicked it off. I mean, you're looking at Chicago at the time, it looked like it was a big risk, what they were doing, and it turned out they had more leverage than we thought they did, and I think that inspired a lot of the labor movements around the country, especially near Chicago, Kentucky, Ohio, those areas. So.
Yeah, that is, last year was a real upsurge of teacher activism, particularly, like you say, in states where there's not even teachers' unions in some cases. Right. So there seems to be, and it's been building, I'd say, for almost a decade now, particularly as the privatization agenda got pushed around the country. There's been a real upsurge in teacher activism, teacher unionism, and so on.
Well, I mean, you've got to see that the charter movement is basically, first and foremost, developed by the Republicans as a way of going after public sector unions, powerful ones. Teachers' unions are the most powerful. So you can see why the billionaires are totally 100% behind it. But in the process, they're turning it into a sort of a standardized education, which would be fatal to this country because they have to have numbers. Those charter schools need to have numbers. So they have to narrow the curriculum to points where they can test and show an advantage. So, yes, I think underlying this big turnout that you see here, perhaps most important of all, was how we were seeing the charter schools movement, the privatization movement, dismantling public education.
And one of the things I was kind of excited to see, too, is that a lot of the parents that were out here supporting, that was a big part of why they were here. They are very concerned about the privatization that's going on here in LA. And so there's a real privatization movement developing, not just among teachers, but it seems among the broader public.
Among parents, yes, definitely. Well, they're just the amount of standardized testing, the amount of preparation for standardized testing, essentially, I mean, it's so common of them to demean teachers by saying that everything they're doing is for the student. But what they're really doing for the student is turning them into a number. That's all that it matters to them, is that they have to prove their reason for being. They have to prove they're better than private. So it's all testing, all number. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not inspiration. It's not love of learning. It's not knowing the child. And that is the fatal flaw of the movement.
One other topic that I think is very interesting for Chicagoans in particular is the fact that, we've been pushing very hard in Chicago for a reform to establish an elected school board. We currently have a school board that's appointed by the mayor, and given the mayor's position towards the union, you know what the result that's going to be. However, I think LA is maybe an example to Chicago, too, of how that's an important reform, but it's not a panacea, right? Because you guys have an elected school board here, but the last elections here were just unbelievable. The amount of money spent by pro-privatization interest to make sure that they got their people on the board.
Absolutely. Outside groups came in and paid big time the last 3 years, and sending out slick brochures with not necessarily totally accurate information. And their job was to elect a majority on the board, which they got. And in fact, Ref Rodriguez, who got elected and had to resign due to some financial improprieties, stuck around long enough so they could elect Buettner. Buettner is, in fact, the second step of the privatization movement. The first step was the Board of Education. Buettner's the second step. His job, and the one we've got to watch out for, is that he's very kind of closed-door, behind-the-scenes kind of a guy, and you bet he's going to be working the privatization movement. And so part of the reason we really would love to see him resign or forced out is because we know why he's here, and it's not for public education. This is what you're up against if you get an elected board. You're going to have to be vigilant. And so for you, yes, I think there should be an elected board so that people can say something. We have an election coming up in March, I believe on the 5th. That is huge because it's going to replace Ref Rodriguez. So if we can get a public school candidate, instead of a privatization, then the majority switches again. So this is a very important election for everyone involved with public education.
I guess the advantage of that, again, having an elected school board and then having these elections that are very public and the newspapers are reporting on it and the media is reporting on it and it's in there out there in the public, is that it does kind of raise just general public awareness. But I definitely understand from the experience here in LA. Again, it's not an easy fight. And when you have, it was almost $10 million spent, right, to support the pro-privatization candidates. That's tough to fight.
There's a lot of money coming in, and yeah, that is what we mean by, with inequality, people, financial inequality, a vast amount of power accrues to those who have it. And what's happening is that power is being brought to bear. The privatization movement is just part of what happens when capitalism seeks a profit center. It's water under the dam. So seeping under the dam, and we don't want that dam to collapse. We're shoring it up is basically what this movement is all about.
Well, we're here at this rally. It's an exciting day. One of the, I think, the most exciting things about the strike in general has been the way that there's a sea of red shirts throughout downtown LA every day, right? It's like the teachers have really taken over the downtown of this city. And I think that's, again, we talked about whether or not, Garcia's been helpful or not. If he has, it's, I think, been because of just the constant show of display of strength on the streets day after day.
Right. And I think, really, look at this is almost my entire school. Everybody is here showing up. They've showed up every day. They are committed. In many cases, make me look like I'm, slacking. So it's very impressive. And yeah, it's been that way with the whole district. It's just great to see this amount of support, these amount of people coming out and just saying enough's enough.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You're listening to Labor Express Radio News, for people by working people, and our coverage of a victorious strike by teachers in Los Angeles. In the second half of tonight's program, we'll hear from teachers who voted yes on the tentative agreement, and they'll tell us what was gained by the strike. But before we discuss what was won, I do want to provide time for those who felt the tentative agreement should have been better. Indeed, as I tried to get a sense of what was going to happen with the vote on the sixth day of the strike, I originally thought that the agreement might be voted down. On social media, especially the union's Facebook page, the sentiment was overwhelmingly against the TA. I heard complaints from many teachers I talked to as they reviewed the document in the hours before they voted that afternoon. A very common complaint was the rushed manner in which the vote was taken. In the interest of getting schools fully operational the next day, the union had agreed to hold the vote the same day they announced the tentative agreement, giving teachers only hours to review it. It also resulted in a little over 70% of the teachers actually being able to get to their schools to vote. As you will hear later in the program, even teachers who voted yes admitted that they did so largely based on reading a summary of the tentative agreement rather than the full document. Unfortunately, the teachers I spoke to who voted no on the tentative agreement were very reluctant to speak to me on tape. Even the one teacher who agreed would only use his first name. As you will hear in this interview, besides the short voting window, probably the biggest criticism was that class sizes were not reduced more. We will detail what the TA says on class sizes later in the program, but in short, classes will remain as large as 39 students for core subjects and often much larger for non-core curriculum.
Abelardo.
And you're here voting on a contract with your fellow teachers. You seem to have some pretty strong feelings about the tentative agreement, is that right?
Yes, I am. I feel like this needs to kind of go further. We didn't have to settle. And I feel like the class size for the teachers for 39, the English and Math at the high school level is unacceptable. And what about the rest of the core subjects? So across subjects classes, we are dealing with 45. And if you look at the electives, which are basically the arts, and we are dealing with almost 50 students per class, and not to mention the PE classes, which are like about 60. So I feel like this needs to go further. I don't think we need to settle on this case, and I think like teachers need to reconsider this, and we need to be asking the district to lower the class size if they really want to make a meaningful change and support the students like they are saying. They need to reduce the class size. I will say no more than 35 if we really want to start with that across subjects, not only the English and Math. And if they want to benefit the English and Math, they should reduce it at 30. When I started working in 1998 for the district, the class size was like a 32. Now we're dealing with a 45. And I feel like that's one of the issues that we need to be considered. I mean, I appreciate that at least they made the effort to, change some things. But this is the basic of changing the way we are addressing public education. The class size is outrageous. 39 doesn't do it at all. It's just start counting like 2 minutes per student. Your time is you are in a 6-period day is gone. It's like 60 minutes or 59 minutes. If you're in a block schedule, you probably have like 82 minutes. Not even with that. You don't have enough time for every student. I mean, I feel like it's not acceptable. We need to go back and tell the district that we need to reduce the class size. I can just cap it at 35 across subjects. And math and English will be like 30 and the most, I will say. And now with the salary increase, I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, we were asking for nothing, like 6.5 is nothing. Okay, they owe like the famous, cost of living increase since 2007. And 6%, we were asking 6.5. 6%, like 3 for 2017 and 2019, that's an offense to teachers. That's unacceptable. And then for 2018, 2019, another 3%. I mean, it's not even competitive rates for teachers to start working as teachers in the schools. We are in short, actually in California, we need more teachers, but the young generations, they don't even want to be working as teachers when they see this type of salaries. This is ridiculous. And we need to bring the brightest, but we need to offer more incentives to them. And I think the district has $2 billion. They can use at least half of that to do everything that we wanted to do and make Los Angeles unified against one of the first in the nation. And that's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of frustration, and I think part of the frustration, too, is just in how the vote's being held, too, right? Because this was a very quick turnaround. In fact, when I heard today that they were going to vote this afternoon, and it was all going to be decided, and you guys were going back tomorrow, I was like, wow, that's basically, they're kind of basically saying it's done.
Yeah, and I don't agree with that. I mean, we love to go back tomorrow, but we keep negotiating, but not to rush this voting. Teachers need to think about it, and I think the way we are doing it is to rush it. As usual, we always rushing, and that's why we don't get what we deserve. And the students deserve more than this. And I feel like as we have time, that we should have time, and I hope that everyone, in LA at least voted down this. And if not, anyway, we already made a big mistake of rushing as usual. I feel like we can go back to school tomorrow. That's not a problem. We love to do that, but we are negotiating that. But we need to change this. And I feel like if we really want to benefit the district with the students, we need to capsize at 35 across curriculum everywhere. And they want to benefit from the English and math, they need to put it at 30.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I appreciate it.
No, thank you.
You're listening to Labor Express Radio. It's called the only English language labor news and current affairs radio program and our coverage of the successful strike by teachers in Los Angeles. Teachers were not the only ones to express frustration with the tentative agreement. The success of the strike was in no small part a result of the widespread support the teachers received from parents and students. 2 students I spoke to as their teachers were voting expressed some of the same concerns that we just heard from Everardo. I was impressed by how articulate on the issues and committed to the struggle these 2 young people were. I think the frustration they expressed in this interview is a stark reminder of just how much public education has been under attack and how big a fight we still have ahead of us to ensure quality education for all.
I'm Axel Martinez. I go to Ramon C. Cortina School for Visual and Performing Arts.
I'm Georgiana Borkart, and I also go to VAPA, or Ramon C. Cortina's School of Visual and Performing Arts.
And you guys are out here with the teachers who are voting the contract down. Were you guys out here throughout the strike supporting the teachers?
I attended the strike today, yes.
I've attended like 5 of all 6 days.
And I noticed that you're looking over actually some of the summary of the contract. What's your thoughts about what you see in the contract?
Well, I'm looking over it, and sure, it's like change, but I just feel it's not change enough. Like, I thought we were trying to fight for like a way bigger reduction of students in our classes, but for me, 1 student per year does not feel like change, really. To me, it just kind of seems like the district is kind of just doing whatever just to not be in the strike anymore. If anything, it's just kind of like to stall until we do more change. A lot of people I was talking with smart teachers, and they're saying, well, it's a step in the right direction, but I'm just kind of questioning whether it's a big enough step.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they're only reducing 4 students in all out of the 44 that they're already there. They're saying that it'll be at 39, which isn't enough. And that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for a way lower reduction. And it's only in in ELA and math. And I think it should be in all subjects, including art. Art classes are being way overpopulated, especially at our school. Our school, there will be 60 kids in our class, and they can even add more, especially because our population, our school is going up, and probably in other schools too, because art is becoming a very popular thing to go to.
Yeah, it just kind of leaves a lot of people, a lot of classes in the open. It's a small change. It's only very particular to a few classes. Again, ELA. I just feel like since I do attend art classes, because this is an art school, and I see like the classes and how big they are, and I know some people who have classes that are 60 people, and like it's just I thought that this contract would have at least included like all classes, not just ELA and just math and English classes. So for me, I would have preferred it if they would have opened it at least, to all classes and made the reduction bigger. But definitely, this doesn't feel like enough change, at least through my point of view. I was really, I gotta say, a little disappointed about how it's been going so far. But I guess it's gonna take a little bit more than just one strike, I assume.
So is class size the thing that most concerned you in this strike? Is that the main issue you think that was they were fighting over here, or were there other issues that you were concerned about as well?
I think, well, it is not the only one. We're concerned about kids' mental health, their overall health, because the schools are practically raising the children. Children are spending most of their youth time at schools. 8 hours pretty much, and I think that you need to cover all subjects. You need to cover health, mental health, you need to cover development in all the aspects, and I just think the schools aren't doing enough to do that.
Is that for you as well?
Yeah, honestly, like health is kind of mishandled in LAUSD. What I know is that you can get hurt, but chances are the nurse isn't going to be here to help you. And other than that, I think we need some more counselors. I think for me personally, sometimes as a student and as part of this young community, it's kind of hard to find any kind of guidance, and just we gotta rely on sometimes on only like 1 or 2 counselors to help with our problems, not necessarily academic, but all our problems. And I would like to see more, but when I'm looking around these counselors, that just 17 additional full-time counselors, I would expect there to be more. 17 is that's not even enough for all schools. But
yeah, I think there were people that were actually excited about the fact that there was going to be, I guess, 1 nurse for every 500 students or something like that. But when you think about that, that's for 500 students. That's a lot of students, right?
Yeah. And also with the counselors, with my own personal experience at our school, it's 250 kids per counselor, and even that is too much. And they're saying 500 kids per counselor. And our school, we are privileged enough to have a lot of opportunities, and our school has a lot of money to spend in these subjects that not a lot of other kids have access to, and we're really lucky. But even with our 250 kids per counselor, I barely get to see the counselors. I have to wait hours. I have to go in every day if I want to see a counselor, and sometimes it takes weeks for me to even get a chat with my counselor, and I think that's overrated and ridiculous.
I think one of the things that people that are not so happy with the contract are frustrated with too is that I think they feel like they have the momentum on their side right now, right? That this was an incredibly powerful strike, a lot of support from the community, students like yourselves out there supporting, and so I think one of the things they're frustrated with is they think, well, if we everything's going our way right now, why sell ourselves short? Why not ask for more?
Personally, I would like to see a strike for longer. This, for me at least, is not good enough. We do have momentum. We have support from across the nation. We have, all these people in the community that are on our side, And for me, at least, earlier this week, for me, it wasn't whether we were gonna win or not. It was more about when we were gonna win. when are we gonna get what we need, what we deserve? And I just feel like this is kind of like a bump in the road, something that I feel something that the LAUSD is putting just to make us not strike anymore, just to make us not use our full potential as a community, as a union. And that's what bothers me most, because I would like to see a lot more change happen in my educational system. Not only for me, because I'm a senior, I'm graduating, but for like everyone that I've known, everyone that's young, my brother, my sister, And I just don't want them to deal with like issues that I'm dealing with when it comes to just how mishandled schools are, I've had trouble like this year as a senior, because I need people to help me at least with my college applications for my future. But oftentimes it's very hard because again counselors are super busy, and it's tough. It's tough on me, but it's also tough on them because it's like they're nonstop working. Sometimes they're always going to be in their office even during lunch or break. They're still making still working. They're still making those letters of recommendation. They're still like helping kids find new classes. So I would feel like that's kind of like a violation of our rights as workers.
I think it's unfair because teachers go into this profession everybody knows that teachers don't make enough money. They barely make enough money to live off of, most teachers have second or third jobs. I know a lot of my teachers talk about their seconds and thirds jobs, not with me, but with my parents. And I feel like teachers can't talk about the fact that they make next to nothing to live. And I think that's unfair because they do go into this profession for the kids, not to make money. It's very clear that they do that because you don't go into this profession thinking you're going to get money. It's unfair that they're only getting a 6% raise and they don't get to talk about it because me as a student, I'm all for them getting their raise because they're there for us. They're here for us. They deserve that. And I feel like a 6% raise over 2 years, they may not be saying anything, but it's not enough.
We need to take a station ID break, but when we return, we'll hear about what was gained in the new contract with striking LA teachers who voted yes on the tentative agreement. You're listening to Labor Express Radio News for working people by working people and our coverage of the successful strike by teachers in Los Angeles, California. Before the break, we heard from an LA teacher and 2 students who felt that the UTLA could have won more in their new contract. But as we will hear from the next group of teachers, there were serious, significant gains which none can deny. Just as importantly, the strike proved that strikes, well organized and well prepared for, can be successful and that the public supports public school teachers and a public school system. It is yet another victory in a string of them nationally that has advanced the fight for quality public education after decades of attack and erosion. At the close of tonight's program, I'll provide a list of the highlights of the contract gains. This list will also clarify some of the almost contradictory and complicated stuff you will hear in regards to what the new contract says about such things as class size reductions. But before we go into the details, let's hear from several teachers who voted yes on the tentative agreement. UTLA reports that as of January 23rd, roughly 4 days from when the TA was announced, 73% of teachers had voted, and of those who had voted, 81% had voted yes on the contract, what UTLA leadership calls a supermajority. If all of the 33,000 members are counted, even if all of the remaining ones voted no, it would still be a yes vote by at least 60% of the membership. My interviews on the last day of the strike reflect this, with an overwhelming majority I spoke to saying they voted yes. However, as you will hear in their responses, even the yes voters acknowledge the union still has much work to do to turn around the public schools in LA.
Mark Schwartz, Ramon C. Cortines Visual and Performing Arts High School.
And people are here voting on the new tentative agreement that was reached earlier today. What's your thoughts about the agreement? Have you had a chance to look at it?
I've looked over the summary, yes. And overall, I think there was movement on pretty much every front that was being discussed. I don't think any particular targets were met, but there was positive movement on every front. And I think that's a success.
And when you say the big issues, I know class size was a big one. I know resources for support staff was a big issue. What are the things that you identify as the ones that were most concerned with?
Class size, resources, and to bring awareness to the proliferation of the charter schools, which is just draining the resources out of the public school system. That was a big element of this whole action. And there wasn't necessarily so much negotiated on paper that was going to restrict charter use, but it brought the whole subject to an acute level of awareness where that's going to keep rolling on. And so that's the bigger picture, I think, gain.
You know, what I am hearing from several people, and it sounds like maybe you're kind of in that same opinion, is that the gains on paper may not be exactly what people had wanted, but they see it like this as a start of a fight or as a, kind of a moment of consciousness raising maybe in the broader public about these issues. Is that kind of where you are at? Or?
Absolutely. This was an awakening in terms of public support for public education. And they rolled back the clock on the whole charter privatization movement, as well as just an awareness of what it takes to actually have a successful public school system, the resources it takes, which have just been kind of wasting away. We have a history in California. It started decades ago with Proposition 13. It started to drain the resources from public school system when they capped property taxes. And this is the end result of that. So now it's just reached sort of a tipping point where we got to reinvest. We got to find some new money. We got to move some tax money around. This is the richest state in the country, I believe. It's a hugely wealthy state. There's no reason for the public school system to be so drained of resources. Right.
You know, one of the things I found most interesting in reporting on this strike from the perspective of people in Chicago is one of the things that the Chicago Teachers Union and other allies have been fighting for years is an elected school board in Chicago, because our school board is appointed by the mayor, so we have no control over that. What I've learned, of course, though, from your experience out here is just having an elected school board doesn't necessarily mean that you have a school board that's in the favor of the public schools, right? Right now you have a school board that's dominated by privatization interests.
Well, like every election, they're heavily influenced by things like money and resources that support one kind of candidate or another. And yes, it's documented. The money, the millions of dollars that have been supporting the charter candidates, both on the school board, on all levels of government, has been enormous. And so the only way to combat that is with numbers and voices of people. And that's what happened here. All the dissatisfaction with being bought out by a privatization of the school system has come to the surface in a huge way.
Well, thank you very much for talking with me. I appreciate it.
My name is Amanda Hutchings, and I work at Ramon Cortina's School of Visual and Performing Arts.
So you're out here with the rest of your fellow teachers voting on the new tentative contract. I want to get your thoughts on what you thought about the contract.
It's acceptable. It's not everything we wanted, but I'm a special education teacher, and lots of wins. We agreed, lots of wins. Class size caps for my program, and those 2 blessed days of assessment time, which are going to be amazing. I know that not everybody's satisfied with it, but I'll take it. I want to go back to being a teacher, and I'm tired of being out here, and I don't know what more days would get us, honestly.
So you said real gains for special ed. You kind of mentioned a little bit of what those were. Can you just kind of lay out real clearly for what were the big gains, you think?
I skimmed, because teachers are professional skimmers, but they capped class sizes so we're 9 and up, because it's under 8 and lower, and then 9 and up age. And so our class size cap is at 8 for deaf and hard of hearing students, which is who I work with. Which is amazing, because my biggest class right now is 14, so that's a tremendous reduction. And I don't remember what you guys got. Special day was similar, 12, which there wasn't a cap before, and I know our cap before I think was 10 or 12 or something like that. So big overall reduction in my opinion. And then we get one day per semester with pay to do the assessments that we're required to do by law for IEPs. So I think those are great wins.
Yeah, I know class size, of course, was probably the number one issue in this strike, if nothing. I mean, there were several really important ones, but that was maybe the top one I heard from everybody. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the breakdown in terms of how people feel about this contract, right? So you definitely saw some serious gains, definitely the elimination of the language in the contract that basically allowed for unlimited expansion of class size, which was ridiculous. But I think some of the frustration comes from the overall reductions are 1 or 2 over the course of several years, right?
I mean, I think that I'm a product of LA Unified, and I literally lived through watching classes get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm 31 now, so I'm 15 years out of high school. But I think that it's important to recognize that it didn't happen overnight, and so it's not going to get fixed overnight. And we need to take time to let our union do their job and continue to advocate for us and continue to try and get class sizes smaller and smaller. But I think this is a really positive step, and that's the important thing, I think, to pay attention to here.
From the people I've talked to, I'd say if I was going to try to sum up maybe a sense or a feeling people are having, I'd say that they're maybe not over the moon about what's in the language of the contract, but they feel that what was kind of the bigger picture of this thing was the mobilization of not just the teachers, but kind of the broader community behind public education that really made the strike worthwhile. Is that what you're at?
I'm also an LA native, and I've never seen us get behind anything all together like this. Like, in general, just really watching the community band together. We had more and more students every day out here, and that was incredibly inspirational. But just getting together as educators and really fighting for something and advocating for something that we wanted and that we felt was important. I think that was the biggest overall gain.
Hi, David Metz. I am a theater teacher at Ramon C. Cortina's School of Visual and Performing Arts in downtown Los Angeles.
And you're out here with your fellow teachers voting on the tentative agreement. And can I ask you how you feel about the agreement?
I feel like the agreement is a victory for public education. It is far more than we would have gotten had we not struck. I think that much is evident. And it's a shame that we had to strike to get what are basic common sense provisions for our students. But clearly that's what needs to happen, and it's a sorry state of affairs in our society that we have to fight for basic educational rights like that. So on balance, I think that the contract proposal does address most of the issues that are concerning our membership and the other stakeholders, frankly, in the educational system.
So what would be some of the key elements you feel that were improved now since the strike in terms of what was offered before the strike and what's been offered in this contract?
Number one is Section 1.5. That was largely seen as a pressure release valve that could be activated whenever the district felt like increasing class size. It could be a scapegoat for putting as many kids in a class as they needed to.
Let me just reiterate for listeners that basically allowed, it was supposed like an emergency measure, but it basically allowed them to increase class size as much as they wanted, and it was basically being used almost continuously, as I understand.
That's right. So we knew that any class size agreement that we made without striking Section 1.5 would be meaningless. And that was something that was it was a non-starter for the district for 21 months. So finally, we got them to take that out. That was the number one gain. Then secondarily, I would say the phased-in class size reduction for English and math classes represents significant gains for stakeholders in public education in the Los Angeles Unified School District. Over the next 3 years, we'll see up to four students per classroom, maximum class size.
So four reduced by 4 for each class.
Yeah, so reduction of 4 in aggregate, 4 students by the end of this contract, which I believe expires in 2022, 21, 22. But anyway, we would, I'm a theater teacher. Some of the gripes that I've heard are, well, that's great for math and English, and certainly it's a good start, but that might wind up putting more students in our classes. So we may have to bear the brunt of some of that unexpected, burden.
Are there other things that you'd point out that you think were real successes?
Yeah, I think there are successes in the area of this idea of community schools. I'm a doctoral student at University of California, Los Angeles' educational leadership program. And a big part of what we learn about is basically social justice issues as it applies to education. And community schools is a research-based paradigm that offers wraparound services that helps to raise the floor for students that are underserved and impacted by low socioeconomic status issues like crime, like maybe food instability, like a number of psychological issues. So these community schools offer wraparound services that create sort of a holistic culture that supports these students. And that is a significant win. I believe 20 schools will be awarded that designation initially, and there will be ongoing more schools that will be added to that, receive considerable amounts of funding, I think $250,000 per school per year. It's a pilot program, but we hope to see it do well, and we're confident that the research that comes out of these pilot programs will be compelling evidence to increase the use of this model.
You know, I know one of the big issues, of course, in this strike was the whole issue of privatization of education and the expansion of charters. I know there is language in the contract on that. It seems like it's a little bit open-ended. It's about kind of a principle of, examining, the charterization that's going on and looking at, halting that. Were you comfortable with what was come up with in the contract in that language?
Yeah, I think that the levers of power that are at play when it comes to charter schools are not necessarily within our reach as a union situated in Los Angeles. That's more of a state issue. And so we are appealing to our Board of Ed to vote on appealing to Sacramento, asking the governor and asking the state superintendent to review the impact co-locations has had on the rest of traditional public schools in the system, and also the expansion of charter schools, both for-profit and non-profit in our districts. So once we get an idea, first of all, I think we're really holding our local politicians' feet to the fire. We sense that there's a huge upswell of support, and we are trying to ride that tidal wave all the way to Sacramento, and they're running scared. I mean, to see the difference between Buettner and his position for 21 months, and then he wakes up and sees this, and to hear Nick Melvoin was in a elementary school or middle school speaking to parents about a month ago, and he made a comment saying, these teachers, they just gotta get it out of their system. They'll strike for a couple of days, 2-3 days, but then we'll get back to business. There was laughter in the crowd, and I felt like it was because it shows the disconnect between the real populace and the people that have been bought and paid for by privatizers to pretend to represent us, but in fact are following this trend that's happening across the country, which is to take control of public institutions and destroy them. And in the process, making a whole lot of money. We're talking $600 billion a year of untapped money. That's just got billionaires like Eli Broad rubbing their hands together, trying to get a piece of that.
For me, coming from Chicago and from my audience in Chicago, I think one of the more interesting things about this strike for us is exactly what you're talking about, which is, we've been pushing for an elected school board in Chicago. It's a reform that we'd like to see happen because our current school board is basically appointed by the mayor, and so we have no control over it. You have that here, so that's good, but the reality is right now that the school board is basically dominated by privatization interests, and they have poured, millions of, almost $10 million in the last election cycle for the school board to make sure that, pro-privatization interests are on that school board.
Right. So it's pretty scary to see that amount of money, and I think $52 million was spent statewide on candidates that failed, spent by pro-charter organizations. Tony Thurmond was elected despite enormous piles of money, because in the end, the people know who's really working for them.
That's important to point out. He's the Secretary of Ed for the state, right? And he was somebody that was actually supported by the grassroots as opposed to the privatization interest. So that was actually a big victory.
Right. So you mentioned grassroots. Unfortunately, we have a lot of deception, misinformation coming from a lot of angles, especially these what are known as AstroTurf organizations that pretend to be working on behalf of stakeholders, but in fact are mechanisms through which the people of Los Angeles are being lied to. So to get back to your question about what is it, how did it, if it's a system that works, why is it so broken? Well, I think, unfortunately, democracy is only as good as the people it represents. And what we felt we needed to do and what a strike can do and what it has done in this city and hopefully has shown teachers in Denver and up north that when you withhold your labor, especially when you do it for a group that is not yours. I mean, we weren't striking for that 0.5%, even though that's what the New York Times put in their headline yesterday or today. We're striking for students. And the bad teacher, corrupt teacher, the greedy teacher, the lazy teacher, monikers that DZ, the former superintendent, who's known for his iPad fiasco, it cost $1 billion, that's slipping right off us. We're Teflon now because we have the trust and support of the people of Los Angeles. LMU did last week did a study, a survey that indicated that more than 80% of the city supports this strike. So we definitely feel supported. Had you been here while we were picketing, you would not be able to interview me because of the nonstop honks, not just from cars, but from city buses, from sheriffs, from undercover cops, and then the firemen, 1,000 of them are behind us. So if they think we're heroes, we're happy with that.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So to recap and to clarify, here's a summary of some of the highlights of what was gained in the new LAUSD UTLA contract. Class size, this is the single most important issue, but is a very complex one. The most important gain here is the elimination of Section 1.5 of the previous contract, which basically allowed LAUSD to increase class sizes at will, regardless of what was in the contract. Section 1.5 is gone, finally making class size enforceable. The other big gain was the immediate cap of 39 students in high school English and math classes. The rest of the gains were more modest, amounting to a reduction of about 4 students a class over the life of the contract. As you heard earlier, these reductions do not apply to all classes at all levels. You heard earlier some concern that the contract did not include in hiring enough nurses, but the contract language stipulates that all district schools will have a full-time, 5 days per week nurse by the first academic day of the 2020-2021 school year. The union also won a contractual guarantee of student counselor ratios of 500 to 1 at every secondary school. This is something you heard me confuse earlier with nurses in my conversation with the students. This is an improvement apparently, but still seems like a disturbingly high ratio. Perhaps one of the most intriguing gains, which you heard mentioned by one of the teachers earlier, was funding for 30 community schools over the next few years. These community schools with wraparound services is something that the Chicago Teachers Union has been demanding here in Chicago and could be a real innovation to improving the future of public education nationally. As you heard throughout our coverage, the fight against privatization through charters was a key demand of the strike. The contract includes a union demand that the Board of Education vote on a resolution calling on the state to stop charter school growth in LAUSD. This may seem at first like a rather weak demand and a rather minor gain, but it has already proved perhaps more valuable than initially appeared. On January 29th, the LAUSD board voted 5-1 in favor of a resolution calling on the state to pass a temporary moratorium on new charter schools. This is huge given, as we extensively described in our coverage, the school board's pro-charter orientation and the millions of dollars board members received from pro-charter interests. This is clearly a victory for organized labor and an organized public fighting back against the corporate-funded privatization agenda. On pay, teachers got a 6% pay increase, not the 6.5% the union had fought for, but without the additional workload that LAUSD had originally demanded. More importantly, however, they eliminated LAUSD's demand for a 2-tier system with new hires receiving less benefits. This is a very important victory for union solidarity. This is only a brief summary of the contract gains. You can find out much more detail by checking out the links at laborexpress.org. I provide several links there that go into more details on the new contract. Before we end tonight's program, there are a few other ongoing issues related to the LA teacher strike I need to mention. For one, the second ever strike by charter school teachers after the one here last fall in Chicago was also victorious in LA last week. I don't have time to provide an update on the new contract at Accelerated Schools of LA tonight, but you can find out more by going to our Facebook page. And even more importantly, the national teacher strike wave is unabated. Teacher strikes in Denver, Colorado, and Oakland, California are likely in the coming weeks. And in West Virginia, which kicked off a wave of teacher strikes in right-to-work non-union states, may see another strike as teachers fight to hold on to the gains made last year as Republican state lawmakers attempt to further take away teachers' rights. We will have follow-ups on these situations on future episodes. I should point out that the interviews aired tonight were edited for time. The full unedited versions can be found on our Facebook page, along with several interviews I did not have time to air and I had to cut completely. You can find those by going to our Facebook page at laborexpress.org. Again, that's laborexpress.org. That's all for tonight's program. Labor Express is a nonprofit 501c3 member of IBW Local 1220. Views expressed on Labor Express are those of its producers, not those of IBW. Labor Express is a production of the Community for Labor Access in Chicago, the world capital of the labor movement. The songs, our theme is called Worker Songs, written by Ed Pickford and recorded by the Dropkick Murphys. Tune in next Sunday at 8 p.m. for another edition of Labor Express.